Night shift gas station clerks of Reddit. What's the weirdest thing you've ever encountered? I was working at a mobile late one night in my hometown, which is a summer vacation hotspot, when a middle-aged man who looked like he just walked off a golf course. He was obviously a little drunk, but drunk middle-aged men who golf was the norm for tourists, so I took no heed. He came up to the counter, and I heard him ask me if there were any gay bars in town. I told him no, that the closest one I was aware of was in Provincetown, a gay hotspot which was an optimistic hour drive away with traffic. He then asked me if I was interested in fooling around with him. I replied no, and in an attempt to soften the rejection I joked I don't think my girlfriend would be too happy about that, which seemed to excite the guy as he redoubled his efforts. His big pitch was that he had an especially nice van that we could pull into the garage bay to use. Granted, it looked like a nice van, but didn't sway my stance. After another 5 minutes he seemed to resign to his fate, and he left the store. I thought we were done, and went back to reading. Half an hour later I hear a car start up and leave the lot. I didn't realize he had just stayed in his van and was waiting for me. I figured, creepy, but whatever, he's gone, so I put it out of my mind. A couple hours after that I was closing up shop, and I had to go out on a ladder to change the prices on the sign for the next day. The town is deserted at this point and all the lights at the station were off save a couple in the garage. While I'm up on the ladder the same van screeches back into the lot. I'm up on a ladder in the dark alone, not thrilled about this development. He hopped out and hollered, "I forgot to pay you." I figured that I had given him smokes or something and just forgot to charge him as I was rejecting his advances, so I asked him for what. He replied, "I forgot to try and pay you for a good time." I paused. He yelled $250. It occurred to me that I could probably just take the dude's money and run, but I correctly assessed that would be really stupid, so I yelled, "Fuck man, no means no." Still on the ladder, he yelled, "Jesus Christ, fine," and peeled out. Never saw him again, thankfully. I worked in a rural gas station garage when I was in high school. One evening I was working, and there were some pretty bad storms brewing. It didn't take long for there to be a fairly large group of people stopped at the station to find some shelter. I didn't think much of it, wasn't the first time it had happened, but then they started blowing the tornado sirens. All of a sudden there's a bunch of adults and families looking at little 16-year-old me looking for answers. There's no basement, so I did the first thing I could think of and shoved them all in the walk-in cooler. Shut us all in and rode out the storm. When it passed I went out and there was a big plate glass window busted and some shit blown around the store. All the people came out of the cooler and were pretty much like, "See you later," and left. I was pretty much left there by myself like, what the fuck just happened? I don't work night shift exactly, but this will work. So, my store closes up at 10 p.m. I come in one morning at around 4:45ish to find an old Native American man passed out in our kitchen. We have a rather large kitchen because we work next to an industrial area with lots of truck drivers / oil field workers who start their work day early, so we make lots of food for breakfast and lunch. So I call the police, because what the hell am I supposed to do? There's a very bad neighborhood behind the store that's constantly hit for drug busts, like hard shit. Plus we find bloody needles in the bathrooms all the time. The police show up like 15 minutes later with some paramedics and the guy was just asleep, lol. Apparently he came in around 9:30 p.m. the night before to use the bathroom and got locked in when the two night shift employees locked up. He didn't have a phone and didn't think to look for ours, so he got a 6-pack of beer out, ate some of our bread, and went to sleep next to the grill. I had a friend who worked at a gas station. He said someone came in one night and produced a gun and told my friend to empty the register. Being completely dumbfounded by the situation, my friend told him that he had to buy something first. This is because to open the register an item from the gas station needed to be scanned at the register. According to my friend, they stared at each other completely silent and bewildered for a few seconds. After that my friend had regained enough of his faculties to explain this to the robber. Then the robber scanned a Twix and took all the money in the register and left. Bought some gas one night before pay at the pump, and when I came inside, saw the clerk was my friend, Dan, from high school, maybe a couple of years ago. Then, We have a grand old reunion through the pace lot under the glass before he buzzes me inside. I comment on how bulletproof the place looks, and he says it's supposed to be. I was on my way home from a girls' night out and had nothing to do, so sat on a stool and we traded what we knew people were up to, blah blah blah. Suddenly this guy in a black hoodie just materializes at the pace lot and I clearly hear the words, "All the money, I have a gun." Inch thick glass or not, I'm ready to freak, but I hear Dan's calm voice, "I'm sorry, sir, but company policy is that I have to see the gun, or I could lose my job." The guy holds his finger up like just a secretary and fishes out this big black handgun from his cargo pants. He presents it in two hands, like he's looking to pawn it. I can see a big screw at the bottom of the grip, which looks funny, but what do I know? Dan again, I'm sorry, that's just a pellet gun, sir, and that doesn't qualify." The would-be robber packs up and leaves, muttering a sumbitch as he goes. Dan calls the cops and sees I'm shaking. He gives me a hug and points out the pace lots are scooped into the counter so that a hand around a gun can't possibly fit under the glass the owner had shown him with a plastic gun. I still thought that was pretty cool of my school buddy. IDK if this was necessarily weird, but more luck. During and after high school I worked at this crappy gas station that closed up at 11 p.m. I started doing my cleaning duties when I noticed a penny on the ground. I picked it up, kept sweeping until I noticed a dime by the door. This wasn't unusual since people dropped change all the time. As I was picking it up though, something caught my eye as it blew past the door. I went outside, looked right, nothing, looked left, and there sat a fat wad of cash. It was nearly $300 laying on the ground. Yes, I kept it. No one ever stopped back by asking about it either. Oh shit, I got a fun one. I used to work night shift at a gas station in Florida straight out of high school. It was a great job. It was so slow that the other cashier and I would hang out front and smoke cigs if we didn't have customers, and sometimes a friend or two would drop by. Well, one night we were doing just that, and we see a truck coming up the road being pushed by 4 guys and followed closely by a police car and another car. The truck is clearly out of gas, and having worked there for a while, this is more common than people think. We figure the police car is slowly riding behind them so that another car doesn't slam into them. This is a normal procedure for police in my city. Well, the exact moment the truck is pushed up to a pump, a whole swarm of police cars fly into the only entrance of the gas station, completely blocking it off. All of the cops are now aiming their AR-15s and Glocks at the guys who push the truck, yelling at them to get on the ground and not move. One of the guys started reaching in the truck, and I thought he was about to get blown away. I should mention that the angle of attack put us in the line of fire. After they arrest 2 of the guys, the other 2 were just good guys helping push the truck. We find out that they had robbed another gas station up the street. Apparently the truck's description didn't match, but they got the license plate right, and when the cop pulled behind the truck to make sure they didn't get hit, he ran the plates and called for backup. They should have gotten gas and the money IMO. I used to love that job. Working security in a bad neighborhood. This guy walking minding his own business in a cowboy hat, cowboy shoes, and a thong, carrying around a raccoon. It looked like he was feeding the raccoon something. I locked my doors ASAP. Edit, wearing the thong lol. I worked at a gas station about 2 to 3 years ago. One night there was a random guy that came in, bought his items, then lingered around the store for a while. I was behind a glass, so I wasn't that worried, but I still was prepared to call the police, because after 45 minutes and it's just becoming 3 a.m, that's a bit weird. About 15 minutes later, a regular customer comes in and starts yelling at me because it's after the legal time for me to sell alcohol. The random lingering guy, we'll call him Rob. Rob started yelling at the man and told him I'm his little sister, so he can't talk to me like that, and ordered him to leave. The rude customer left, and that was when Rob introduced himself. He said he was lingering because he was bored and had nowhere to go and nothing to do. A few of his friends showed up a while later, 2 regulars, and they cleaned the parking lot and changed the trash cans outside. Surprised the shit out of me because I honestly did not ask them to, but I wasn't going to argue because it was dark and I was thankful I didn't have to do it. Rob and his friends left after a while. Rob came back 2 hours later, about 30 minutes before my shift ended, with some girl's bra, to check on me and see how the rest of my shift went. He then came back to check on me other times after that on nights he was bored and had nothing to do. Really sweet guy. TLDR, random guy is lingering, defends me, does my work without being asked, checks on me on various occasions afterwards. Pretty cool guy. When I was in high school I worked overnights during the summer. Only cashier in the store. I'm working towards the back of the store and the cashier island is right in the middle covered with machines. I'm pretty tall, so I can see over most of them. The door ding goes off so I start making my way around to the counter. As I'm doing this a cowboy walks in. I see his hat float across the top of the deli case, the soda machine etc. I greet him, and he greets me back. I really couldn't see him well at all though. He makes his way to get a fountain drink and walks back around to the counter. He has his hat tipped down Marlboro Man style. Didn't think much about it until I rang him up and gave him the total. He digs in his pocket and hands me a couple dollars, except his hand was completely melted, fingers were missing, and the skin was burned off. He was healed over, it wasn't a fresh wound. Then he tips his hat back, and his entire head had been burned. No hair, full burned skin. No lips, no nose and his teeth were bare. It was shocking to see. I was 17 and it was 3 AM on a Saturday night. My jaw dropped. I froze with the money in my hand. He just politely said, "Hey, you owe me some change." I fumbled to finish the sale and send him off. I apologized for my reaction and he just blew it off. Then he said, "I get that a lot, but I'm a hell of a lot of fun around Halloween." We both laughed about it. I lived in a small town and nobody knew this guy. I would ask people for the next couple of years and still people think I made it up. I worked overnights at an isolated gas station the summer after I graduated high school, way back in the late 1980s. This gas station had hot pizza in a clear case, and this case opened from the back. You'd open the case, pull out a slice, put it on a plate and hand it to the customer. One day when I came in at 11 PM, there were 3 slices left in the case, which was 3 or 4 feet down the counter from the register. I had one piece for dinner, then went about working my shift, which consisted of standing at the register waiting for people to wander in. It was a slow shift. I had only 4 or 5 customers in a couple of hours. Not a busy shift by any means, and most just wanted lottery tickets or to pay for gas or grab a pop. But by 1 AM, there was no one in the store or at the pumps, so I got started neatening the store, always in eyesight of the front counter, the register, the lotto machine and the pizza case, and no one came in for the hour I was schlepping around trying to make it look like I was working. Figuring the pizza was pretty well dried out by then, I went to throw it out, opened the case and there was just an empty tray. Somehow 2 slices of, probably 5 hours old pizza, disappeared. Now, the only way to get into the pizza case was to get behind the counter, and to do that, you had to punch in a code, and then the door would buzz really loud and unlock. In other words, you couldn't just reach around the counter and get to the pizza. I scratched my head, spent the rest of my shift nervously worrying that there was some rando pizza eating killer hiding in the store, and when a sheriff's deputy came in around 4 AM, I asked him to check the building for any intruders. He didn't find anyone. Before leaving at the end of my shift, I wrote a note to my boss detailing what happened, then went home. When I came in for my next shift, he was there waiting and told me he reviewed the video. There were cameras aimed at the front counter, door, and over the store, and played it back for me. It showed me ringing out a customer, then going and neatening up the shelves. Meanwhile, on the front counter camera, a couple of minutes after I left the counter area, the camera got shaky and then went to static for 30 seconds or so. When it came back on, the pizza was no longer in the case. Never happened again while I worked there, which was for another 6 months or so, and we never did figure out what happened. TLDR, random pizza ghost came into my gas station and stole 2 pieces of pizza. I used to have this woman come in the store all the time. She constantly told people that we were married and had 7 kids together, and that I didn't really work at Gas Station and Sons, but that I worked for the US Marshals. Had to have her removed for threatening customers and eventually perma-banning her. Moral of the story: kids don't do drugs. Nothing really weird happened per se. I worked at a Florida gas station for 3 years while in college. I saw a little kitten one night near midnight wander through the gas pumps, crying out. Cars were driving around the lot, and it could have gotten squashed at any moment. I ran outside, leaving customers at the counter, and scooped him up. He was filthy. Brought him around back, and since I had no cage and nothing to put him in, I placed him inside a Lay's plastic tote, closed the top, and put a brick on top, so he'd stay in it. Took him home after my shift, put him on the patio. Surprised my family the next day with a surprise kitten, but to my horror, his colon was prolapsing out of his body in a bloody infected mess. Took him to the vet, who said he probably got attacked by some animal. They gave him a bath, gave him shots, and put him on an antibiotic. When old enough I got him neutered. The antibiotic fixed the prolapsing colon within a week, and he's still alive today, about 10 years old, and more of an inside kitty now than an outside kitty. His name is Kitty too. There was a blizzard, and they said I absolutely had to come in for the night shift, even in spite of the state of emergency. That was fucked up, and how I managed to get to work was a story in and of itself. Anyway, halfway through the storm, in the middle of the night, a barefoot man with open wounds all over his face came running in. Then he suddenly stopped, stared at me for a moment, and asked if he could have some napkins. I simply pointed at the napkin dispenser. He took a huge fucking handful, then he looked at me and cracked a huge smile and said, "Thank you," in a very childish pipsqueaky voice. He then disappeared into the night before I could even say anything, and I never saw him again. He was the only customer we had that night besides a guy from the Plo crew who needed some coffee. My guess was meth. One slow weeknight I had a guy come in wearing nothing but shorts and a blanket. He seems freaked out, but relatively under control. No yelling or running around or anything. When I ask him what happened, he asks me to call the cops as there are some people who want to eat him. Naturally I comply. Cannibals or not, something is obviously going on with this guy. Now the place I worked was on a little stretch of empty highway between two towns, and not really properly in either of them, meaning the local police don't really come up that way. It's technically the county sheriff's jurisdiction as far as I understand. Regardless, the bottom line is we normally have to wait quite a while for anyone to arrive. I inform the guy of this. He looks concerned and goes out the door, I assume to wait outside. At the same time, while I'm on the phone with the police, another guy rolls up, and I notice he seems to have left his truck running. Head and interior lights on, engine humming, real obvious. I turn to inform him of this right as blanket guy hops into the truck and speeds off. I still have the cops on the line, so I inform them of this as well. Truck guy naturally freaks and runs outside. A while later, my sort of coworker who the managers pay to watch the lot and help out a bit comes in and swears up and down he saw a car roll up with blanket guy on its hood and just dump him there. I took his word for it. The police eventually come and tell me they caught him and take the other guy away, and that's the last I ever really heard of it. Pulled up, driver started getting fuel and the backseat passenger came in to look at sweets. The driver came in, paid for his fuel, then went back out to the car. The passenger never bought any sweets and spent 30 minutes begging me to sell him beer, can't sell alcohol past 10 p.m, and let him play video games on the PC in the office. He casually mentioned that his friends were taking him to R&D to get treatment for sepsis. His friends had to come in to get him to leave. On his way out he stole a crate of bud. The driver, who is a regular customer, later told me he had stuffed his pockets full of sweets too. Not so much weird but fucking disgusting. I worked at a gas station third shift several years ago, and this lady came in and went straight to the bathroom. This wasn't uncommon at all, but sometimes it was annoying because a huge portion of my responsibilities was cleaning and stocking the store, which involved being out of sight of the registers. So if a customer was in the bathroom, I kinda just had to find something to do by the register. Only so many cigarettes you can stock. Anyway, she was in there so long that I'd actually forgotten about her until she came out and made a beeline for the door. It was about time to clean the bathrooms, and the first thing I did was open up the first bathroom I was cleaning and put the wet floor sign in the doorway. Upon opening it up, I was greeted with the most hideous odor of urine and feces I've ever smelled to this day. The toilet, the wall by the toilet, the sink, The TP and PT roll dispensers were all covered in smears of shit. There were wads of TP on the floor covered in shit. It was seriously disgusting. Rancid. I had to close the store up to clean it in sessions, taking breaks to get fresh air. And I used almost an entire can of air freshener in the store to cover the smell up, but my relief in the morning, could still smell it. I came very close to vomiting and quitting that night. I used to be an overnight manager at Walmart, if that counts. One time I was heading to the break room to eat, and I walked in to find a 7-foot tall muscular man with a giant, grey and black afro sitting there talking to himself. Kinda reminded you of Uncle Ruckus in the face. I think he even had a false eye. I sat across from him and started eating, thinking he might be a Walmart driver just getting some coffee or something. I asked him if he was a driver and he started laughing and said, yeah, I used to drive cars a whole lot. I was like, okay, I mean a Walmart driver, and he just got up and started laughing and left the break room and the food he was eating behind. That food turned out later was a random associate's lunch they packed. I called my support manager to have him be on the lookout in case he did anything else crazy, just for my associate's safety. Later that night they called me to the front door for an emergency. Apparently the man had a wallet and watch that he was trying to trade for instead of paying for it. Like the man straight up was trying to barter with random objects he had on his person. When we stopped him at the door, he threw a fit, started cussing at us, and drove off on a powered shopping cart. We watched him drive it all the way off the lot and on the main road, so I called the police. They pulled him over about a mile from the store and the cops came back to talk to me. They told me the man escaped from a mental hospital and they guess he had changed clothes in the store. The officer also told me that he was in custody, and I also had to come get the scooter or they would have to impound it. I had to get in the police car, ride to the scooter and drive it back to the store at night with a police escort. I took the opportunity to mess with my wife on FaceTime. I called her up, had the police car behind me with the lights on, and I was yelling, baby, baby, I fucked up bad, wait for me on the outside. Then I hung up on her. It was a crazy night though. TLDR, I had to retrieve a shopping scooter that was stolen by a schizophrenic mental patient escapee with the help of a police escort. I worked at a gas station and fried chicken joint. Yeah, you know, it was in the South when I was in high school. One evening this older guy came in reeking of alcohol, wearing a bowler hat, a ratty old Hawaiian shirt, boxers, and slides. No pants. He walked into the store, looked at me and my co-worker, and his eyes went real wide like dinner plates. Then he promptly turned around and left the store. I thought this was odd, but went about my cleaning until I rounded the corner to where he was, and lo and behold, on the floor was a solitary turd that was previously obscured by the counter. This man had walked into our gas station and shit on the floor and immediately turned tail and left without so much as a word. Really makes me wonder what kind of life this fellow was living. Needless to say, I refuse to clean it up as $7.50 an hour isn't enough to pay me to clean up human excrement. Thankfully the shift lead cleaned it. I guess she valued her job more than I did. We printed out the guy's face from the security cameras and made sure he was put on our shit list. One time while working late I was chilling at the counterboard when suddenly 3 dudes come in. One wearing cardboard knight's armor, the other a bathrobe and a paper hat thing, and the last one a bunch of other random crap that did not go together in the slightest. All red-eyed and high as crap. All had the munches and got a bunch of chips and sodas and the usual junk food suspects. Came up to the counter with ye old English accents that were horrible with mostly just overuse of the word ye, and paid in gold, just regular cash with 1 Canadian coin, and said it was D&D night. Then all wandered off to their carriage, which was a sadly rusted old Buick-Lesaba. Made me laugh so hard it was amazing sight to behold. This is a second-hand story, but you reminded me of it. So my friend's working this gas station around 1 AM. Small town, not a lot of diversity here. This white van pulls up, and out piles like 10 big black dudes. They all run into the gas station as one. Suddenly, in a thick Jamaican accent, one of the guys yells out the door to the one left behind filling the tank, "Hey mon, what you want to drink?" My friend relaxes, knowing that he's safe. My friend realizes he might be a racist. I've worked at a gas station in Sweden in a city just outside Stockholm. There hasn't been anything too weird. At nights the store is closed and we use a small window to hand the customers what they want and so on. You know the deal. Every other night at around the same time there is this weird guy that always asks for a frozen hot dog and he just eats it raw like an ice cream. Once a Porsche Macan rolled in at a high speed and 4 guys in ski masks runs to the window and aggressively asks me what the fuck is AdBlue, and I just calmly answer it's an additive for diesel cars. Then they ask me if we have it and I tell them that we store them just outside the window. They then proceed to just grab 4 liters of it and pisses off. This one time, before I lock the doors, a woman runs in and is hysterical and afraid. She is telling me she doesn't want to follow the guy. I ask her what guy, and just as I finish the sentence a weird guy runs in and try to grab the woman. I go in between and tell the girl to lock herself in the bathroom, but what does she do? She fucking runs outside and the guy runs after her, and then I see him speed away off his van with the girl sobbing in the passenger seat. Called the cops about it. Don't know what happened. This other time during a day shift a guy that is visible drunk and high comes in and orders some food. I just make him the food and hand it him. But while I'm making the food I see 4 or 6 large guys enter, and I can see that they are wearing bulletproof vests, and I can glimpse holsters with guns. Now I think that they are either undercover cops or we are getting robbed. As the high guy exists they draw their guns and 4 more uniformed cops comes running and tackles the guy on the floor. It was a bust. They had followed the guy for 40 kilometers from a clubhouse and just arrested him at the gas station. I served them all free hot dogs as they took my statement. Don't work there anymore, and not as interesting stories as other people have, haha. Sorry for any spelling mistakes, English is not my native language. Not an employee, but I live in an area of Tulsa people describe as a bit shooty, I guess. One time I was about to walk into the corner store and I was texting, and as I was texting, my phone died in my hands. I looked up and through the door to see one man pacing the aisles and another holding a gun pointed at the clerk. I turned and got back in my car and I went to call the police. Phone's dead, remember? So I pulled into my complex and knocked on the maintenance guy's door to call the cops and he wasn't home. I knocked on the door of a neighbor I knew and they weren't home either. I went upstairs and charged my phone, and by the time it finally turned on, the police were at the convenience store. Nobody was shot, thankfully, but I remember the helplessness coming off me in waves. The clerk's name was Sanjay, and I had talked to him numerous times. My most vivid memory of him is the day after his daughter was born. He showed a photo to every customer who came to the counter. I left in fear, and the whole time I waited, I was terrified he would have been killed, and that I would have been the last person to see him alive. One of my first jobs was a gas station night clerk at a truck stop. Weird was kinda normal. For example, we had this homeless guy come in. He grabbed a few cookies and began to eat them. He poured a cup of coffee, spilled some, cleaned it up with a rag, then put the rag in the coffee machine. Next he went up to the register and handed me a receipt. He asked me to charge the cookies and coffee to the receipt. I nodded and said, "Sure thing, you're good to go," and he walked out. I then threw out the coffee with the rag in it and made a fresh pot. Not weird, but the overnight guys used to trade stories. These are going to be robbery/attempts. This is in a rough neighborhood in Canada, so sure safe by USA standards, but plenty of drugs. First, my own funny robbery's first one was a great introductory robbery. The guy was really nervous and was pushing along the back of the store, oblivious to the cameras, and then wrote a note on a lotto paper using our pencils in full view of the camera turn. "Have it to me as robbery." It read something about his wife being in a hospital and needing money for medical bills, which makes no sense in Canada, but I was not going to question it. When the police arrived, they and my manager showed me just how much footage we had of him in the store. He was arrested the next morning. My second robbery ended up being hilarious. Corporate got involved. Tone does not translate in reports. So this guy comes in and says he needs a favor. Now, this is common: cheap muffin, cheap coffee, some water, or use of the staff washroom. So I ask what he needs. He tells me that he needs money. Now, you are not allowed to panhandle/beg in stores, so I told him and asked him to leave. This is when he tells to give me the money, or he would pull this out and fuck me up while gesturing with a hand in the pocket. Oh, I exclaimed, "You're robbing me." I opened the register and have him the money. Now this was sufficient for the other overpass guys to get a laugh, me thinking a robber was begging or wanted a coffee. But corporate thought I was protecting the store. So in came someone from head office, spoke with the manager, regional manager, assistant manager, and then me. This last conversation was the shortest, as 2 minutes in, she realized a lot of money was wasted on her coming out, since I was not protecting the store, but just a bit of naive. Now, my third robbery is not in itself funny, but two things that came from it are. Now we had a door buzzer, which is a good thing as I was inventorying the cigarettes to do the order, so the buzzer had me time to turn around and then jump back as two guys with leather knives rushed the counter. "Give me the money. Give me the fucking money. Give me the money now," one of them yelled while wildly swinging his knife. Fear. I then knew true fear. I could feel the wind from the moving blade. The lizard brain deep in me took over and shouted back, "I can't, you're in the way," or something to that effect, likely with a lot of panicked swearing. The calm robber grabbed the other's coat and yanked him back. "Hand over the cash," and off they go, or rather tried to. One stripped out without issue, the other tried to palm open the locked door. The police photographer was impressed with how textbook perfect the handprint was. Now, the next day, one of the hookers was quite upset. I later learned that she turned in her boyfriend for robbing me. He was the one waving the knife wildly because I was always nice, treated her with the respect of a person, and would let her warm up in the store on February nights. The last one was actually useful. You don't get robbed when people are in the store. Point zero. The other overnight guys. And the manager laughed endlessly that a string of crimes was solved because a hooker turned on her boyfriend because he robbed a decent clerk. Those are just my stories. The other guys had refocus ones of their own skinny crackheads trying to rob them with cinder block, someone coming on with a syringe of AIDS, and the countless failed attempts of Robert/shoplifting on the slightly, absolutely, terrifying Pakistani ex-military guy. I have fond memories of working there. It was good while I was a student, but boy am I glad it is not my lifelong career. Was April 1st and about noon. Kid walks in with his jacket partly unzipped while his friends were outside with a camcorder. Kid reaches into his jacket and shows me the handle of a pistol. "Give me the money." I look at him, look out the window at his friends, and then try to judge whether I would be able to get around the counter fast enough to grab this little punk and fuck his shit up. I decided that he would probably be able to scurry away before I could get a good hold of him for the beating he so richly deserved. So I looked him right in the eyes and very calmly and quietly said, "You better turn around and leave right now before I fuck you up and make your parents cry." Kid just looks at me, backs away, giggles nervously and takes off. If I had been 2 feet to the left though, I would have just gone to town beating his ass. Not an attendant, but I certainly tried to be weird once while I was driving cross country. It was about 3 a.m. in rural Missouri when I pulled in for a gas stop. After filling the car I went inside and picked up a Gatorade, porno mag, 2 rolls of duct tape, condoms, and a tube of super glue. As I set the items on the counter I looked at the clerk and smiled, saying, "I'm not sure who yet, but someone's having a good time tonight." I worked next door to a convenience store in a video store. My buddy worked in the convenience store. His girlfriend at the time was a major bitch and would always bug him at work showing up randomly. One day a older guy kind of heavy came in and asked to use the bathroom. My buddy gave him the key and he went on his way. Right after which my buddy had an emergency and had to leave the store for like 20 minutes and asked me to keep an eye on it. After he leaves his girlfriend shows up drunk talking about she needs him and wants him, etc etc. I had enough of it and told her he was in the bathroom. I didn't know about the guy in there. So she goes in there and this is what I heard. The lights were out and she found my buddy in there on his back in the floor with a raging boner. So she jumped on him and did the deed. Few minutes later my buddy comes back and asks where she was. Told him that she was wasted and I said you were in the bathroom. About that time a scream is heard and it turns out the guy that was in there had a heart attack while jacking off. So, long story short, she ended up having sex with a dead guy thinking it was my buddy in the bathroom. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye.